Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And those of you who are here, I hope you can hear me. If not, you can just let me know.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. Just before we proceed with the main topic for this afternoon, which is fingerprinting, I'm sorry, guns. We are just need to finish off the last couple of slides from the last class. I know that was a long class, but unfortunately, that's just the way it goes with these summer classes. I have to try and fit everything in. We were left with one small topic, which I do just want to introduce to you. You can go and read in your textbook if you like more details about this. But for those of you interested in biology, this is a very interesting part of forensic science, and it is a relatively new development over the last 20 years or so. It's become increasingly important, and this is forensic entomology. As soon as anything dies, as we saw before, very quickly cells in the body begin to break themselves down. Their own enzymes begin to digest them from inside out. That is called autolysis. I could say autolysis. Either is correct. That process, even that really happens really very quickly. That process begins to release molecules which go into the atmosphere and are disseminated and very, very quickly picked up by, especially by flies. And there's one group of flies who are particularly important, and these are the blowflies. And the blowflies will track the molecules. They will sense them in the air, and they'll fly towards their source. And they will then lay eggs on the body. There's one important trick to this, and that is that this is, for most species of flies, is usually only done in daylight. So the development of the flies follows a very rigid series of periods of growth of the maggot, which hatches from the egg, and the maggot molts several times, and eventually it reaches a mature form, creeps away from the body, and it pupates. It forms a pupa, and then a new adult fly emerges. The length of time it takes from egg to emergence of the new adult is dependent on temperature. So if it's very warm, it happens more quickly. If it's colder, it takes longer. But with that, the knowledge of what species of fly you are dealing with, what their lifespan is, how long it takes from egg to emergence of an adult, and knowledge of the impact of temperature, you can use the presence of these maggots on a corpse to get an approximate date of death. This is often very important. This is not necessarily a time of death. Sometimes it can be. For example, if somebody's killed during the day and is found very quickly, the presence of eggs on the body can be an indicator that it occurred that same day. But if a body has been out for some time, if you look at the maggots that are on the body and you work out how long it has taken them to get to that stage, you can work out when eggs were very first laid. So it's very often now is when a body is discovered, which is in a state of decomposition, that flies have actually begun to colonize it. Very often, even the first arriving officers should sample the maggots, as many different stages of maggots as they possibly can from the body, and keep them. They keep them some preserved. They keep some alive so that they can be cultured. The adults can emerge, and they can be properly identified, because that's very important. The flies are not the only insects which will colonize the dead body. There's a whole succession of insects that will colonize the dead body at different stages of decomposition. So looking at the insects, studying the entomology of the body is extremely important, and is now a recognized part of investigation. The commonest fly that is used is the blowfly, which is a bright, you've all seen that bright green, blue-green iridescent fly. There are several species with some differences in their life cycle. But of course, an entomologist can identify the particular species and use that to discern exactly when eggs were laid on the body. So I should also tell you that the whole study of decay of a body is a science in and of itself. And we may have, if we have time in a later class, I'll discuss this in more detail. In the meantime, if you are interested, here are some movies. This one is just a kind of a generalized kind of movie about forensic entomology, and it'll give you a lot of detail about how insects are used. This one is also very, very interesting, a bit longer, but this is not for people who are squeamish. This has some pretty grisly depictions of maggots eating bodies and things. But this is an interesting case here. This is an actual case in California where a case was solved through examining insects, the insect remain on the remains of somebody who was found in the open air. Okay, so that's really just to, oh dear, what happened? No. No. It's work, no, that's not supposed to do that. I'm sorry, hold on 1 second. Let me just go back here. Now I'm completely lost. I don't know what to do. Hold on, let me just see if I can stop this. Are you all still with me? Just give me a second. I did something really stupid. Now, okay, there we are. All right. So now let's get on with today's real topic, which is a description of the importance of the study of ballistics, of guns and bullets in forensic science. It should be apparent to all of us, especially here in the United States, just how important guns are in the commission of crime throughout the country. The level of gun ownership in the United States is higher than anywhere else in the world. There are more guns legally in possession of human beings than there are human beings in the United States. This is a simple fact. There is another fact, and that is that possession of a gun, people who possess guns are at a higher risk of an adverse event involving a gun. This is another simple fact. Yes, go ahead.
Are you showing the slides?
I beg your pardon?
Are you showing like the slides right now?
Oh, are you not seeing?
Yeah, I'm not seeing. All I'm seeing is like the tabs and like where it says Zoom in the middle. Like.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Just give me 1 second. Let me just see if I can do this. Can you see now?
Yeah, we can see the slides now. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Thank you for telling me. Any case, so there are many different kinds of guns. I confess that I don't know much about guns, but that's not the reason we have to like speed over our description of guns themselves. But we're going to talk about mainly about 3 basic kinds of gun. The first are the handguns, and this is of particular importance in the United States. The vast majority of gun injury and gun death in the United States occurs because of handguns. It can be attributed to handguns, not to semi-automatic rifles and things. Those sit high in our consciousness because they are associated with really dramatic events like mass shootings and that sort of thing. But in fact, far more damage is caused, results from use of handguns. And handguns are heavily involved in crime, in accidents, and in suicide as well. So we need to know a little bit about the different kinds of guns. Old-fashioned guns were single-shot pistols. A pistol really is a relatively small handgun. That was the original idea. But a single-shot pistol was a pistol which would fire one bullet, and then you had to remove the casing and you had to put in another bullet. Very, very old-fashioned, and nowadays probably the province of collectors and aficionados. The whole handgun industry was revolutionized by the development of this kind of gun, which is a revolver. And of course, revolvers are still widely used and still in wide circulation. And the characteristic of a revolver was, unlike a single-shot pistol, the revolver could carry a number of bullets. It's usually 5 or 6. And the name revolver comes from the fact that the bullets are carried in this case, in this casing here, which is a cylinder, which spins as the gun is fired. Each time the gun is fired, the cylinder turns to bring an unspent bullet into line to be fired. So there are different kinds of revolvers. This is called a swing-out revolver. In a swing-out revolver, the cylinder is brought out to the side and the bullets are put into it. When all the bullets are fired, they have to be emptied and the new bullets put in. A break-top revolver, you've probably seen in movies, it's the sort of revolver which you literally break. It looks like you're breaking it, and it exposes the back of the cylinder to remove the spent bullets and put in new bullets. And this one here, the solid frame revolver, this is not generally in wide usage. A solid frame revolver, you have to, you can break it, but you have to turn the cylinder one by one to put it doesn't expose the whole cylinder, it exposes the cylinder holdings one by one. So just be aware of the fact that there are many different kinds of revolver and many different makers of revolvers and handguns. And this poses a problem, of course, for a forensic investigator. And because each of those has their own characteristics, it's a problem in that we have to keep up with the field. We have to know what is being produced. It's an advantage because it actually gives a possibility, as we'll see, of identifying the gun from the bullet that was fired through it. Each type of gun has its own characteristics. So those are the handguns. This is a semi-automatic, also a handgun. It's a semi-automatic pistol, and it's called semi-automatic for a very distinct reason. Instead of having a cylinder or something like that, it has a magazine. You load the magazine yourself, separate from the gun. This is a relatively small magazine. Some of them are much larger, would stick out of the bottom. And the magazine is inserted into the butt of the gun here. There is an elaborate loading mechanism here. A bullet is picked up from the magazine and it is moved into this area here, which is called the breech, and is readied for firing. Now, it's called semi-automatic because with these guns here, you actually have to manually load the bullets. Once you've loaded into this magazine, then in most modern revolvers, they are called double action. When you pull a trigger, it cocks the firing pin, moves the firing pin back, and it brings a new bullet into line. So there's the two actions. A single action gun only moves the bullet into line. You actually have to cock the gun yourself. Most guns in use, handguns in usage, are dual action. But in the semi-automatic, the bullet firing itself, energy from that bullet firing is harnessed by the gun itself to perform all of the action. And what it does is it ejects a casing and it moves a new bullet into line. With those other handguns, when all the bullets are spent, you have to manually remove them and replace them. In the semi-automatic, the gun does it for you. The gun moves a bullet into position for firing. And to do that, again, it harnesses the energy generated by the explosion of this powder, of the explosive powder inside the bullet. A fully automatic gun is one where when you pull the trigger, it continues to move bullets up and fire them as long as you have the trigger depressed. A semi-automatic is one where you have to pull the trigger for each bullet. So one pull, one bullet, one pull, one bullet. Fully automatic, pull, and it carries on firing as long as you've got your finger on pulling the trigger, release the trigger, and it stops. Fully automatic pistols and long barrel guns are illegal in the United States. They do exist, but they are illegal. They are regarded as military grade weapons. So those are the handguns. Handguns characterized by having a relatively short barrel. But a long gun has a long barrel, and that is for a specific purpose. The long barrel of the gun enables the bullet to be fired a much further distance with continued accuracy. With a short-barreled handgun, the accuracy is much less than for a long barrel. You'll hear the same kind of distinctions. A single shot is manually loaded after each firing. Again, old-fashioned, and probably now just the province of collectors and specialists. A repeating long gun is one where you have to undertake some physical action in order to expel a spent casing and move a bullet into the breech for firing again. And there are various ways in which this can be done. I'll show you one in a second. Automatic and semi-automatic long guns, it is the energy of the gases generated by the explosion of the bullet is harnessed to perform all of the action of expelling a case and then moving a new bullet into the breech ready to fire. And again, that semi-automatic, one pull, one bullet fires. Fully automatic, pull the trigger and it carries on firing. A typical example would be a machine gun. Pull the trigger and it fires bullets as long as you've got the trigger pulled. Again, semi-automatic are legal in the United States. Fully automatic are illegal for private ownership. So here's a repeating long gun, and this is called a bolt action long gun. What you have to do is you have to lift this up and slide it forward and back in order to expel a bullet and move a new bullet in. These guns would hold relatively few bullets. They don't have a magazine the same as that handgun did. You may also hear about pump action. This accomplishes the same thing, excepting it's got like a mechanical slide here that you move forward and back to perform the same action. Much more common in shotguns, as we'll see in a minute. So here is a semi-automatic long gun. This is the gun of great notoriety in the United States because this is a gun which is frequently used in mass shootings, also widely used in criminal activity, in criminal endeavor, but they are in fact legal in most parts of the United States with license. Extremely dangerous weapons because they are accurate, very accurate. They were developed as military weapons. And they can be fired extremely rapidly, even though they are semi-automatic, one pull, one bullet. In addition, for nefarious purposes, they can very easily be modified to become fully automatic. And there have been several mass shootings in recent years where people have used a modified semi-automatic, which carried on firing once they pull the trigger. So the semi-automatic long guns also can carry a large number of bullets. This is just one kind of magazine. You may have other magazines which are much longer. This is the magazine here. This is the hand grip with the trigger here. And this is a weapon of notoriety in the United States. Okay, so here are reasons why the long guns are more accurate than the short-barreled handguns over a long distance. All gun barrels, apart from shotguns, this does not apply to shotguns, all handguns, pistols, long guns, the barrel of the gun is rifled. That's where the name rifle comes from. The barrel of the gun is marked with deep grooves, and they spiral down the gun barrel. When the bullet is fired, when the projectile moves through the barrel, it actually is scored by those markings, and it begins to spin as it goes down the barrel. By the time it leaves the barrel, it is spinning really fast. And in a long gun, it's got a long way to go. It spins much faster. And by spinning, it acquires accuracy over distance. So this spinning is induced by these grooves and raised areas in the barrel, which are manufactured into the gun barrel. So these here, the raised area, is called the land. And this area here is the groove. But what you must realize is as the bullet is passing through here, it's going to be deformed by the lands and the grooves. And the bullet will emerge with a raised area here and with a groove cut into it. So the land and the groove refer to the barrel of the gun. Okay, they will appear as a raised area and a groove in the bullet. By the way, the diameter across here, from land to land, is called the caliber, and so 33 millimeter, obviously, 33 millimeters across like that. So this is just a 3D depiction of the lands and grooves showing that they are actually spiraled down the whole of the barrel. These lands and grooves, there are various ways to produce them, but the commonest way is to cast the barrel either as a tube or as a solid cylinder, and then they are bored out. They are drilled out during manufacture. So those lands and grooves become tremendously important in forensic science because they are imparting markings to the bullet itself as it passes through that barrel. And the land and groove characteristics are decided, obviously, by the manufacturer. and they are characteristic of that particular manufacturer, and often of a particular batch of guns, or a particular model of gun has those land and groove characteristics. But it obviously is only class characteristic. It doesn't give it individual. You can, a very knowledgeable ballistics expert can look at lands and groove structures and maybe be able to say, okay, this is a Remington or something like that, but not be able to say this got fired by such and such a gun. Just like anything else, the class characteristics allow placement of the evidence into a group, not to move that particular bullet or whatever into individual identification. But there's something else that happens during the manufacture of these guns. When that rifling is done, the process is actually imperfect, and each time it's done, it is actually works out. It's done slightly differently. Each gun barrel acquires markings from that process. On the lands and in the grooves, there are imperfections. There's small pieces of metal left behind. There's small gouges taken out, all at random. So the barrel actually acquires individual characteristic. And as a bullet is fired through it, the bullet reflects those characteristics of the barrel. Small raised areas on the lands, for example, will cut a stripe into the bullet as it passes through. Small imperfections end up producing striations on the bullet itself as it passes through the barrel. And if you have a bullet with these markings on, there are a number of things you can do. You can start to use those markings on the bullet, analyze them, and they can, if you have the physical evidence to do so, can be tied to a particular gun. And we'll see in a minute how that is done. So not only the bullet itself, the projectile as it goes through the gun acquires markings. The whole bullet acquires markings, and this is because the whole process of moving that bullet into the breech, hitting it with a firing pin, firing it through, and then ejecting it. Each of those is a mechanical process. And what you're doing is you are pressing metal against metal when you do it. And not only the projectile acquires characteristics as it passes through the barrel, the bullet casing may acquire characteristics from all of those operations, which also may give the bullet casing individual characteristics, which may allow it to be tied to a particular gun. Now, I just want to mention here, because we're not going to talk at length about other aspects of this acquisition of individual character, but I just want to point out to you that this is very common. For example, if you've got a tool, let's say you've got a chisel, and you buy that chisel from Lowe's, and it arrives and it looks perfect, right? And it's got a nice blade on it and everything, and you start using it. And very soon, that sharp edge, the manufactured edge that you arrived with, that it arrived with, begins to get worn down. It begins to acquire marks on it. Now, somebody comes to your house, they steal that chisel, and they go away and they use it to break into a house. And they do so by forcing it into a window, whatever, levering the window open, and they leave behind marks. And those marks can be tied to that chisel. And the marks are individual marks, because the wear that you induced in the chisel, the chips, the small markings, etc., were put there at random, it is highly unlikely that another chisel would produce exactly the same marks as that chisel. The same kind of argument can be used and is frequently for example, for automobile tires. Automobile tires, as they are manufactured at a factory, first of all, they have class characteristic. They have the tread and everything depends upon the manufacturer's specifications. But in manufacturing those tires, small imperfections may be imparted to the tire. And in addition, as the tire is used, it acquires character, and it acquires individual character. A track left by that tire can, if it's a good enough track and if the investigation is good enough, that track could be tied to a particular tire because it has individual character. The same thing happens also, very importantly, with shoes. You get a new pair of shoes from the store, you put them on, and immediately they begin to acquire individual character. They acquire damage at random. And if you leave a shoe print, that damage may be apparent in the shoe print. So all of this, the individual character from wear acquired by guns and imparted to bullets, all of these kind of instances here are all examples of how an object can acquire individual character if you can read it well enough. Okay, so let's return to our individual character of bullets. The markings left on the bullets, because the bullet is speeding through the barrel horizontally and spiraling at the same time. The marks on the bullet are lines. They are striations, and they are one of the most important ways in which a barrel imparts individual character to a bullet. But in addition, as a gun is used, it also acquires there's wear and tear on the lands and the grooves, and so it acquires individual characteristic, which can be imparted to the bullet passing through it. So the standard way of trying to link a suspect bullet to a gun is that, first of all, obviously, we have to have a gun that is suspect. We have suspect bullet and we have the suspect gun. Now, how do we tie the two together? A ballistics expert will, under controlled conditions, fire a test bullet through the gun. And we can then compare the test bullet to our suspect bullet. And we can see if the striations on the bullets are the same. So here is some illustration of what we're talking about. These here, it's a bit difficult to see on this because it's two-dimensional, but this here is actually a land marking. It's a shallow groove cut into the bullet. This here is a groove marking. It's actually a raised area on the bullet. So these are class characteristics. The size and everything are determined by the manufacturer. But that's not what the forensic expert is really interested in. What the forensic expert is interested in are these fine lines here on the bullet there. These are the striations. And what we want to do now, of course, here's a bullet which is actually from a crime. Okay, so this bullet has been recovered. When it's recovered, it has to be treated extremely carefully so that you don't damage any of the likely forensic evidence. Many of these markings are quite fragile. You can see the land and groove, these broad bands here. Those are the land and groove markings. But here you can see striations on the bullet itself. So the ballistics expert presented with this and presented with a suspect gun will fire a test bullet through the suspect gun, and then compare these two. And to do so, they make use of this instrument called a comparison microscope. Comparison microscopes can be used in several different situations, but their commonest usage is for comparing bullets. And so here, the test bullet fired under controlled conditions is here on the right-hand side. Here's the question bullet here. And this is actually inside a land marking on the bullet. And you can see here that these striations actually match almost perfectly throughout. And the conclusion which the ballistics expert comes to is that both of these bullets have been fired through the same barrel. They have both acquired the same individual character, and it's displayed by comparison here. Here is the microscope itself. It's actually like two microscopes, really. It gives you two images, and it just brings the two images together for you to do the comparison. It's been in the comparison microscopes have been in use for a very long time. I think they were invented in the 1920s. Okay, so there's one other kind of gun you will frequently hear of, used frequently in crime, unfortunately. And these are shotguns. And the shotguns are different to rifled firearms like long guns and handguns, in that they have a smooth barrel. And the reason for that is that they don't fire a single projectile, which could be induced to spin. Instead, they fire a whole mass of very small pellets all at once. And so that those individual pellets are not going to acquire any individual character from the barrel, no matter what the markings inside the barrel are. Again, in shotguns, we don't talk about caliber, we talk about the gauge. It's the same thing as the caliber. In shotguns, it's described as the gauge, is the diameter of the inside of the barrel. Again, shotguns, they usually have limited number of projectiles inside them, but the spent casings are expelled and a new one is brought into place, often by use of a pump action. And you'll often hear this referred to a pump action shotgun. This is what it is here. Then there are other shotguns which are double barreled. You load two shotgun cartridges, fire one, and there are two triggers. You fire one and you fire the other, and then have to reload. Shotguns do not have a great accuracy over a very long distance, but they are extremely dangerous because they fire this cloud of projectiles at high velocity. This is a shotgun cartridge. It looks completely different to a bullet, but the principle is actually the same, because here is powder, an explosive powder. In front of it here is a plastic casing called the wad. And in front of the wad is this densely packed shot, which is all of these hundreds of these small pellets all packed together. The smokeless powder in here, the explosive powder, is set off by what is called a primer. And we'll hear more about that later. The explosion drives the wad and the pellets out of the gun. So the wad itself is spat out of the gun. Now, in the case of shotguns, as we said, the pellets do not acquire any individual character. But there is very frequently the wad is spat out and may acquire some individual character. But the most important individual character in the shotgun cartridge, if we're trying to link a cartridge to a gun, is actually acquired here at the back by mechanisms that we'll talk about in a minute. So all of those striations and things, that's not that important. But if there's been a shotgun used at a crime scene, the investigators will look very carefully for a wad, and they will keep it very carefully because this is made of plastic, and very often imperfections in the wad are repeated in other cartridges which were packed at the same time. So the wads may be able to be linked to a particular batch of cartridges. Okay, so here is a bullet itself, and we just spend a little bit of time talking about this. First of all, the bullet casing is this whole metal case here, and the metal casing has to be strong because it's got to contain the forces generated by the explosion of this explosive powder in here. Now, in the old days, this was just gunpowder. Nowadays, it's usually what's called a smokeless powder, and it's depending on the manufacturer may have different compositions. But the smokeless powder is a relatively stable explosive powder. It's densely packed into the casing, and when it is actually set off, it actually detonates. That means it all goes off at once. It's so densely packed together that the whole lot explodes all at once, and it generates a tremendous amount of very hot gas at a very high pressure inside this casing. And the casing itself is strong, and the casing is held by the gun itself, by the breech, which is where the bullet is being held. So all of the force, most of the force of the bullet, of the explosion rather, is forward, and it drives the projectile out and into the barrel and speeding down the barrel and out. This explosion doesn't occur that easily. This is, as I said, relatively stable. The explosion is actually set off by this little apparatus here, which is called the primer. It's a little metal casing, and inside it has a small amount of a very, very unstable explosive. As long as it's in the casing like this, it's relatively safe. But any sudden friction on this area here will cause this primer to explode, and it's the explosion of the primer that sets off this powder, inside, the explosive mixture inside the casing. So let's just have a look at what happens when you actually pull a trigger. So here's, we've seen before, here's the magazine with all the bullets in. This is called the breech here. And we've got to move this bullet into the breech there. To fire the bullet, this firing pin here has got to be drawn back and allowed to snap forward very suddenly. When it does so, it smacks into the primer. This primer explodes, and it explodes the bullet, and the bullet is fired. Now, this is a semi-automatic. The gases and the energy from that explosion actually are harnessed by the mechanisms of the gun to expel this now empty cartridge and to move another bullet from the magazine through this breech loading mechanism up into the breech. A new bullet is loaded at the same time as the cartridge is expelled. At the same time, realize that the firing pin, the next shot, is going to snap back and forward and is going to hit the bullet casing. Now, the bullet casing in general is very strong, and it survives intact. The bullet itself, its fate, depends on what it hits. Sometimes a bullet will hit and will be wildly distorted, and you may get no striations discernible on it. by the time it's finished. Other times, bullets can be recovered relatively intact, and we can get individual forensic information from them. But all of these actions here, moving the bullet up here, moving the bullet into the breech loading mechanism, loading the bullet, and then getting hit by the firing pin, and then getting ejected by the ejection mechanism. Each of these is a mechanical process where metal is moving metal. And imperfections in any of these mechanisms here impart individual characteristic to each of those moving parts. And that may be imparted to the bullet casing. And I'll show you a couple of examples now. So even if the bullet, we don't get individual characteristic from the bullet, we may be able to get individual characteristic from the bullet casing, from events that have happened here. So all of these, the different mechanisms, the breech loading mechanism, breech structures, the firing pin, and the ejector mechanism, each of these may impart individual character to that bullet as it's fired. And here is just some examples. Again, we'll use the comparison microscope to compare them. But these are firing pin impressions. And firing pin impressions can be extremely important. Just look here, you've got a suspect bullet and a test bullet. And all these markings, the whole structure of the firing pin marking here imparts individual character. And it is apparent looking at these that these two are identical, that they were fired, they were hit by the same firing pin. In other words, the implication being they were fired from the same gun. Here, these are markings on the back of the bullet. Again, here's the mark of the firing pin there, but ignore that for the moment, because these marks here on the back of the cartridge are actually marks from the breech face. That is a plate here against which the bullet moves. When the powder explodes here, the projectile moves that way, but the casing actually flies backwards. That's why you get its recoil on the gun when you fire it. That fires the bullet casing into this metal sheet at the back, which is called the breech face. And that breech face has its own characteristics. And they are imparted to the back of the bullet. And here again, we've got a test firing and a suspect bullet. Looking at it through the comparison microscope, you can see how the striations match up there. This bullet hit the same breech face as this bullet hit. And the implication is they were fired from the same gun. So there's a tremendous amount of information that can be gathered just from the bullet. That's not the only thing. The individual manufacturers produce different explosive mixtures, not only for the bullet, for the casing itself, but for the primer as well. There are individual formulations for these different explosives. And when the bullet explodes, it produces a cloud of different material which emerges from the gun itself and from the front of the gun. And that may be deposited. It may be deposited as powder residue, as gunshot residue. And if the muzzle of the gun is sufficiently close to a surface, it may be imparted directly to the surface. And the distribution of that can give us a lot of information. First of all, about how far away the gun was from that surface when it was fired. And in order to do this, a ballistics expert may in fact test fire a gun at different distances from surface to see for that individual gun what are the characteristics by distance of the powder deposition. First of all, here is a shot which has been fired in contact. Do you remember I showed you a gunshot wound where a gun had been held against the skin and the gases and everything split the skin? This is a somewhat analogous situation. Here a gun has been held close against a textile. And you can see here, first of all, there's this star-shaped cut. But you can see here clearly there's material has been deposited here. And this material is the remains of primer. It's the remains of explosion of the explosive mixture, whatever, the smokeless powder that was in the bullet. And it's also a mixture of vaporized and molten metal from the bullet itself. As the bullet moves through the barrel, it moves extremely fast, and it is being propelled by very hot gases. And small amounts of metal may actually melt off, be scraped off and melt, and emerge as a cloud at the end of the barrel. And then when they settle on something, they solidify. And that can be extremely useful because individual manufacturers have individual formulations for the mix, the alloys that make up the bullet itself, and the primer and the explosive mixture. We can tie chemical composition to at least to a class identity for different bullets. So this is a contact shot against textile. Obviously, pressing the barrel is going to limit the area that stuff can be deposited. Some of it is blown out around here, but most of it is here, right on the textile itself. So as you increase distance away, the probability that material is going to be deposited gets less and less and less, and the area of deposition gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But by about a yard, 36 inches a meter or so, a deposition is unlikely to be occur extensively. You may have a small amount, but be very little. The bullet itself, however, as it passes through textile or surface or flesh, it will leave a marking. And this is material which has literally been scraped off the surface of the bullet as it passes through, and it's called wipe, bullet wipe. And it produces this distinctive dark coloration right around the bullet hole itself. And again, it may be very useful if it's chemically analyzed, if it can be chemically analyzed. These deposits, they may be difficult to see, but you can actually stain for them. You can use a chemical staining. In this case, they've used this substance, rosinote, and it produces a purple coloring where gunpowder residue is present. So here's just an illustration of how the amount of deposition decreases as we move away from a surface. So this is a short distance. This dark part here in the middle, that's the bullet wipe. But it's this halo of material around here that we're interested in. This is all unburnt powder, powder residues, bits of molten lead or whatever that is impinged here and is settled. As you move further away, even a small distance, the area increases, but the deposition decreases. This is 18 inches by 36 inches. Most of it will have fallen out of the air by the time the bullet reaches the surface that it hits. You may have to look really carefully to find bullet holes, bullet marks, especially on textiles. This is a good illustration. There's actually a bullet marking there. Becomes very, very visible when you look at it under infrared light. There it is there, the same shirt. It's actually there. Here it is under infrared light. And you can see the bullet wipe really clearly there. So there's no other deposition. What's our supposition? This bullet was fired from further than a yard away. Now, it's not only the stuff coming out of the front of the gun that's important. The stuff coming out of the rest of the gun is important. Just have a look here. Here's the barrel. This is all the material flying out. This is all the stuff, burning powder, molten metal, whatever. But have a look here. This is stuff blowing back from the gun. It's blowing out of all of the gun is not sealed completely. The gases are actually vented backwards as well. And this is also composed of this kind of substances that we find in the forward residue. And this blowback is can be deposited on the hands of somebody firing the gun, but also on their clothing as well. And it is relatively easily detected, especially if it is tested for quickly. It will last on clothing until clothing is washed. But on hands, it's easily washed off. So this is one of the reasons why it's really important at a scene to identify likely suspects and ensure that you do things like this, taking swabs from their hand to test for gunshot residue, to see whether they have recently fired a gun. This is done, these little stubs, you can see this is marked here, and it'll be marked like right thumb there, and then they'll swab the different areas of the hand and test for gunshot residue. Clothing will also acquire these depositions, and this may be extremely useful. This is an electron microscope photograph of a deposition of material from a gunshot. And these are actually blobs of molten metal, which have then solidified and settled onto the cloth. But when you take a scanning electron microscope, it not only gives you a picture of it, of these droplets of formerly molten metal, you can actually use the electron microscope to analyze the metal composition, the chemical composition of these. So it'll tell you what the composition is. Okay, so we'll stop there for today. This is an important section, so I'm going to carry on next time. And for the moment, I would like you to watch this, please. This is another like 15 or 20 minutes, and this gives you an insight into how ballistics and how gunshot residue is used in an investigation. Okay, so that's it for today. Do you guys have any questions?
No.
Okay, are you sure? All right then. Okay, so tomorrow will be recorded again. Stay in touch if you have any problems. And don't forget, please, that I've put up a discussion, and I look forward to seeing people's commentary on the discussion. Okay, and then you'll see me in recording again tomorrow. Feel free to contact me anytime you want. Wait a minute, I see that I've got somebody sent me a chat. 1 minute. Oh, it says yes. Okay, thank you. That was me asking if you could hear me.
Thank you, Professor Bai.
That's fine. Nice to see you. We've got quite a few people here.
Have a good day, Professor.